Howdy, folks. How we doing tonight? I hope everyone is well. Tonight's going to be just a chill episode because I got off into the weeds. I got way off into the weeds. You start going down this MK Ultra rabbit hole, and it takes you in so many different directions, and you can't help it because it leads in too many different directions. I ended up down the Charlie Manson rabbit hole, and I ended up buying a book. Ended up starting to read a book. And I got away from the whole point of this episode, which was to get on just to go over the Ted Kaczynski stuff. Because if you guys didn't hear, Ted Kaczynski is dead. And I saw today that it was ruled a suicide. So I don't know. There's that. So that's interesting. I'm sure there's plenty of Trump news. We're not going to get into much any of that. We're going to talk about Ted Kaczynski tonight. We're going to go over Uncle Ted. And yep, I'm calling him Uncle Ted, because it pisses off the Krasensteins and it triggers them because, well, it's funny. So let's talk about what they did to Uncle Ted and why. Well, can't say that's why. Can't say it's why he decided to murder people, because that wasn't good. But we can certainly talk about some things that maybe contributed to his psychological state when he started doing said things. Anyway, welcome to episode 30 of CaliBased. I can't believe it's already 38 episodes. I'm shocked. I really am. I made it this far, so that's good, and I'm glad you guys are with me. I got some usuals that hang out, and I love you guys. It's wonderful, and I usually go over a bunch of different topics that are trending in the news, but I didn't want to. I just want to talk about Ted Kaczynski tonight because that is just such a unique story, and it leads off in so many other directions. But I ended up having to break out my my good old storyboard again, and I wanted to go over all the stuff that we know. I don't want to get too tinfoily, at least maybe till later down in the episode. But let's talk about what we know. But before we do, if you can give that like button a tap, it helps the algorithm. Comment, subscribe, send it to a friend, all that good stuff. Much appreciated. All right, well, let's talk about Ted Kaczynski, or Uncle Ted, as he's called, as that was trending. And he does have sort of a cult following, and a lot of it, is just like, it's a libertarian joke. A lot of it isn't. A lot of it, there's some serious anarchist following with Uncle Ted. I do not condone murder. I do not condone sending bombs to people. But I do think it's funny to call him Uncle Ted because I think he was a product of psychological manipulation done to him that sent him over the edge. And he was technically a genius. His IQ score, there's some back and forth as to what that actually was. But if it was the initial testing number, then he was up there with Stephen Hawking and people like that. So he is definitely an interesting case, and if you haven't read his manifesto, his 35,000-word manifesto, it's quite interesting, and it's hard to argue with a lot of the stuff that he says in there. Unfortunately, he went a route that I think most of us would not condone. I hope you guys would agree with that it's not good to start sending bombs to people. Don't do that. It's a bad thing. That's the thing too, is it wasn't effective what he did. I mean, if it was a terror campaign, and I guess that was effective, but I mean, the majority of the time his stuff didn't work. So for being such a highly intelligent individual, he was much less effective than, other mass murderers in history. So I guess it's a good thing that he wasn't that effective. So let's go over the stuff that we know about Ted Kaczynski. He was born May 22nd, 1942, born in Chicago. And very soon after he was born, when he was 9 months old, he got an allergic reaction and broke out in hives and stuff like that. And he had to be hospitalized. And for an extended period of time, he was alone. And, at 9 months old, that can kind of mess with you. So yeah, I actually found a little clip of Joe Rogan talking about it. What the heck is going on here? Sorry. Sorry, folks. All right. Yeah, let's watch a quick clip of Joe Rogan talking about. I think he was drunk in this clip, but let's listen to him talk about how he was treated in the hospital, because there was a Netflix special on this. So I think it's this one. No, it's definitely not that one. Which one is it? Oh, sorry. This one. Alrighty. Nope, wrong one again. Sorry, folks. I'm supposed to be better at this by now. All right, let's try this one more time. All right. Ted Kaczynski breaks out in hives, has to be hospitalized, and he's alone for an extended period of time. This is what they said in this Netflix special.
When Ted Kaczynski was at a tender age, he got sick and was taken to a hospital with hives or swollen red bumps that appeared on his skin. His family said he was isolated from his parents as doctor tried to determine what was wrong with the infant. Mom always faulted the hospital. They would have been there every day visiting, but the hospital said no. David Kaczynski said in the docuseries, it was kind of like, we don't want parents to be in the way. We've got our work to do. We have our little baby to cure, so keep your distance. They were only allowed to visit him 2 times a week for 2 hours.
Oh my God.
It's insane.
I mean, so then you think about us
Look at
being
this
in
at the
quarantine.
bottom.
Are we going to create serial killers?
A little bit, but look at the bottom. He'd come out and he'd never been the same after that, she said. So
I'm pretty sure that's his mom that he's talking about there. That said he was never the same after that. But I mean, he was only 9 months old, so what is she comparing that to? You know, there's a noticeable change after that, though. And yeah, afterwards, it was said. Well, let me continue with my storyboard here, because yeah, my next clip that I'm going to play isn't even going to be for a while. So I just have a bunch of bullet points here. So after that, after he separated from his mother, he demonstrated a fear from being separated from his mother. He was less responsive and more withdrawn. He did socialize well in elementary school, so it seemed like it started to get better, but then they had to move. And they moved it looked like right when he was finishing elementary school, and he was going to like a middle school and an intermediate school. And when he went there, they gave him an IQ test, and he tested like off the charts, between like 160 and 170, which is insanely high. I guess that's what do they say? It's 4 like degrees, not times, but like degrees higher than your mean test score. I think the mean IQ is like 110, 115, something like that. 165 is really high. 130, if you're like 130, you're at the really high IQ. 135, really high IQ. So they allowed him to skip a grade, and he skipped 6th grade. So looks like he moved when he was in 5th grade, just right when he was starting to fit in his elementary school, and then goes to another school. And they probably had to decide whether they wanted to put him in elementary school for one last year or just go to the middle school. So they go to the middle school, they test him. He tests super high. They let him skip 6th grade, and they put him in. He doesn't fit in well. It's a new school. He's getting bullied. He's a loner. And he gets bullied like through high school. But he did well academically, go figure. So he's getting bullied. So he just kind of focuses on schoolwork, probably becomes withdrawn, doesn't want to hang out with people. He was interested in math, and he ended up skipping 11th grade because he was doing so well in school. So he skips 11th grade his junior year, and he graduates high school at 15 years old. That's pretty so, that's 2 or 3 years younger than most people graduate high school. And he goes to Harvard at 15 years old in 1962. And at Harvard, he was described as a genius, but socially awkward by his professors and people around him. So pretty typical. I mean, you guys know genius level people like like they did a good representation of what's his name, Nash in A Beautiful Mind. Can't remember his first name. I don't know if you guys remember his first name. Wally World's going on. What's his name? Something Nash in A Beautiful Mind that Russell Crowe played. I don't remember. But so goes to Harvard. He's 15, so he's already like the young weird kid that's super smart at Harvard. I mean, people try to get into Harvard at normal age and don't get in. Anyway, so gets into Harvard, and he ends up enrolling in a psychological study, and he spends 200 hours in this psychological study, which we will get into later. The psychological study. That's a big part of the Harvard thing. He did enjoy his time at Harvard. He, for the most part, he did really well there, excelled in mathematics, graduated Harvard with a degree in mathematics in 19. What was this? Oh, didn't get it down. I think it was like 65, 66. After Harvard, he went on to the University of Michigan, and he earned a master's and doctoral degree in mathematics. In 67, at age 25, he became an assistant professor of mathematics at UC Berkeley. So at 25 years old, he's at UC Berkeley. Like, that's one of the most prestigious universities in California. That and UCLA probably. Those two probably. But he's a professor there at 25 years old. So this dude is legitimately smart, highly intelligent. He conducted research and taught there. So he was giving lectures and he was a teacher. And his style was described as rigid and disconnected. A lot of this stuff I am paraphrasing from a Todd Grande as well. A Todd Grande sort of, it's a video, but it's like a report that he did because it's just packed full of information. He's a psychologist. So he's a professor at UC Berkeley at 25 years old. People don't like him. He's boring. He's withdrawn. He's like reading from the textbook and stuff. So it's not a good fit. And then, boom, sort of with no reason, just without any explanation, in 1969, he withdraws, he leaves, he quits, and moves back to Michigan with his family. I believe it was Michigan, right? Yeah. And he ends up moving back with his parents, and then he ends up moving into this 10 by 14 cabin that he built with his brother, his brother David. And, well, I also had to decide how I was going to tell this story, if I was going to start with his crime or if I want to start with his early career. His early life. I obviously decided to start with his early life. I just figured it would tell the story easier. So they built this cabin, this little 10 by 14 cabin. Doesn't have running water, doesn't have electricity. It's in super rural Montana, right? Yeah, super rural Montana. And he's living there, and he's actually seems like he's being peaceful and enjoying life. And there starts being like urban development, and this sort of enrages him. And, well, up until this point, he had no criminal record, no religious affiliation, no substance abuse. He did this I found very interesting. He did have a history of seeking mental health treatment. In May of 1966, while in I'm sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit there. Yeah, he did have we'll get to his mental health treatment in a little bit, but there's something very interesting that he has a history of. In May of 1960, in in May of 1996, while in prison, he tested at as a 136 IQ. So I did think that was fairly interesting. That's a major drop off. Still very high IQ, but a major drop off from a 160 IQ. So this is his mental health issue or history that he had at the University of Michigan. He had excitement fantasies of wanting to be a female. So, that's a bit interesting, but that's not saying he's transgender. That's saying excitement fantasies of wanting to be a female, and that's something that I feel like there should be a lot of focus on right now. There's gender dysphoria, which is in this book, and then there's this sexual thing that some men want to do where they get off on being perceived as a woman. And I think that's a completely different thing from gender dysphoria, I believe. Psychiatrists, psychologists, help me out. But Ted Kaczynski, apparently, while he was at the University of Michigan, had excitement fantasies of wanting to be a female. And he went to talk to a mental health clinician, and when he was sitting in the waiting room, he got nervous and just got anxious and decided not to tell the clinician. Still talked to him, but didn't mention it. And he never brought it up. In 1988, he sought counseling several times regarding establishing a relationship with a woman, and he had insomnia and depression. So I'm obviously skipping over I'll go over all his crimes at the end. He got a plea agreement in June of 20. Actually, maybe I should. No, yeah, I want to go over. So I'll go over what happened to him. I'll go over the crimes at the end. So he got a plea agreement on June 22nd of 1998. He got life without parole, which he did appeal several times, got rejected. His lawyers wanted to do an insanity defense, which upset him, and he possibly could have got a better deal if he would have went with an insanity defense, but he rejected that and took the plea deal of life in prison without the possibility of parole, apparently, but he appealed that. So he was trying to get paroled. On January 7th of 98, he attempted suicide by choking himself with the elastic band in his underwear. But when he started to see stars and go out, it clicked in his brain, oh crap, what if it doesn't work and I don't die and I get brain damage? So he aborted process. So that's interesting. So apparently he explained that to the psychiatrist after. So because of that suicide attempt, a judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Sally Johnson is the psychiatrist that conducted the interview. And now's where I'll go to Dr. Grande to talk about the psychiatric side and what this doctor diagnosed Ted Kaczynski with from her perspective, and Dr. Grande's estimation of what he thinks was actually wrong with Ted Kaczynski. So let's go to that really quick. This guy is an excellent go-to if you're trying to understand a particular psychiatric disorder. He's probably gone over it on YouTube. If you also just want to understand particular psychiatric disorders, just order the DSM-5 and look it up and just read specifically what it is. That's the best place to start. All right, this is Dr. Grande. He's great.
And because of this activity, a judge ordered a mental health evaluation. A clinician named Sally Johnson performed the evaluation. The total interview time in this assessment was about 22 hours. An intake interview at a mental health agency would take about 1.5 to 2.5 hours. So this was an extremely thorough evaluation. The report is 51 pages. It's actually quite interesting. I'll put a link to it in the description for this video. As part of the mental health evaluation, Kaczynski was given an MMPI-2, so this is a Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, arguably the most advanced psychometric instrument that has ever been developed. He was also given a Milan Clinical Multi-Axle Inventory 2, a Beck Depression Inventory, and a projective test called the Draw a Person Picking an Apple from a Tree. All right, so that's a real thing. I didn't just make that up. That's an actual test. It's not too popular anymore, but at that time it was somewhat popular. Projective tests have kind of fallen out of favor. The idea behind a projective test is that you have kind of a neutral stimuli and somebody will project their own thoughts and feelings onto that stimuli. So the Rorschach test, the ink blot test, is another example of a projective. They're based on a psychoanalytic theory, defense mechanisms. Projection is one of the defense mechanisms. So now back to the MMPI. Dr. Johnson's interpretation has been disputed by many other people. I'll cover that controversy after I talk about her diagnosis. I did a comprehensive review of the MMPI-2 a while back in another video. I'll put the link to that video in the description as well. Dr. Johnson gave Kaczynski a provisional diagnosis of schizophrenia, paranoid type. This diagnosis was available in 1998 under the DSM-4. It's not available in the current DSM.
So back in 98, the DSM-5 wasn't available, and they had lots of different types of schizophrenia listed back then. They've since refined it, and now it's just one type of schizophrenia. And the criteria are, and you don't have to meet all 5 of the criteria. I believe it's just 3. Yes, at least 3 of these 5 criteria have to be met for schizophrenia. Delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, or frequent derailment or incoherence, grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, negative symptoms, for example, diminished emotional expression or abolition. All right.
In the current DSM, it's just referred to as schizophrenia. There was also a disorganized type, catatonic, undifferentiated, and residual type in that old DSM that have been dropped. In addition, we see that Dr. Johnson diagnosed Kaczynski with paranoid personality disorder. This is a cluster A personality disorder in the same cluster as schizoid and schizotypal. She also diagnosed him with antisocial and avoidant features. So not avoidant and antisocial personality disorders, just the features. Interestingly, antisocial is in cluster B and avoidant is in cluster C. So in this diagnosis, we see
cluster B is like the ones that most of us are familiar with, like narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, codependence. There's a couple other ones too.
All 3 of the personality disorder clusters.
Histrionic. I think histrionic's another one.
Are represented. Dr. Johnson believed that paranoid personality disorder was premorbid. So that means that she believed that disorder was already there when the schizophrenia developed. Now, the schizophrenia was justified by the presence of 2 long-standing delusional beliefs. Modern technology was controlling Kaczynski, he believed that, and he was verbally abused by his parents when he was young, which led to him being unable to establish a relationship with a woman. Dr. Johnson noted that Kaczynski was not psychotic at the time of her evaluation. Now, the paranoid personality disorder was justified.
So before he started killing, he was diagnosed with that schizophrenia. It sounds like.
By Kaczynski's pervasive distrust of others. The antisocial personality features were justified by the criminal offenses that he committed. Now, she would have probably given him the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, except he did not have symptoms before the age of 15. So he met enough of the symptom criteria, but he did not meet that other criterion. The avoidant personality features were justified by the long-standing pattern of isolation and having difficulty in social situations. Dr. Johnson believed that Kaczynski was competent to stand trial, which, of course, in this case, functionally meant he was competent to accept the plea agreement. Now, it may sound unusual that he was found competent, but it's really not a high standard there. One has to be able to understand the nature and consequences of the proceedings and to assist attorneys in their defense, right? So, again, it's not really necessarily a high bar that's set in this instance. So now moving to the controversial interpretation of the MMPI results. Dr. Johnson's interpretation of the results suggests that Kaczynski honestly answered all of the questions, including some that indicated he had strange thoughts, odd perceptions, and feelings of isolation and alienation. His profile was said to be consistent with someone who would be socially insecure, introverted, shy, as well as hostile, irritable, and demanding. The profile was also consistent with somebody who would avoid social activities and keep their distance from people, who would be described as cold and distant and be unable to directly express feelings, and who would be hypersensitive to criticism and troubled by a lack of relationships. This point is particularly interesting because it runs contrary to the idea of schizoid personality disorder, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. So some interesting conclusions we see from the evaluation of Kaczynski, specifically from the MMPI results, but there has been some disagreement, as I indicated. There's another popular theory about how this MMPI could be interpreted that we see in the research literature. So this theory goes like this. The results of the MMPI indicate that Kaczynski was overreporting symptoms. So it's possible that this can be attributed to his unusual personality. So his unusual personality could lead to an unusual pattern of responses. But another possibility would be that he was lying. This other theory also finds no evidence of disordered thinking, little evidence of delusions or persecutory ideas, no depression. He was upset about the prospect of an insanity defense, but that's not the same thing as depression. This theory says that there is a pronounced lack of positive emotions indicated in this MMPI profile, and that's not the same thing as having negative emotions. So positive emotions are tracked on extroversion, and negative emotions are tracked on neuroticism. Additionally, here we see no signs of anxiety. So with this theory, what does that really leave us with? Well, it seems to align with schizoid personality disorder. Now, interestingly, this...
So this is clearly more for like, people that are studying psychiatry, because they're getting off into the weeds. Your normal everyday person doesn't need to know the difference between schizoid personality disorder and schizophrenia. But, I thought I should just at least play this to speak to Ted Kaczynski's state of mind when he did said things. So let's at least let him finish for the last 2 minutes here.
This is what the prosecution experts believed that Kaczynski had. So again, they had a difference of opinion there with Dr. Johnson. Another interesting point here, the results of the Milan indicated elevations on the schizoid clinical scale. So just to cover the other two assessments that were given, the BDI, the Beck Depression Inventory, and the draw a person picking an apple from a tree, both those test results came back as normal. So what is schizoid personality disorder? Well, it's a cluster A personality disorder. We see 7 symptom criteria in the DSM. 4 or more are required for a diagnosis. So the symptom criteria are neither desires nor enjoys close relationships, including being part of a family. This one seems to align. Almost always choosing solitary activities. This one seems like a good fit, considering he lived in a cabin in a rural part of Montana. Has little, if any, interest in having sexual experiences with another person. I don't think this one fits. Takes pleasure in few, if any, activities. This one's not really clear. Lacks close friends or confidants other than first-degree relatives. This one seems to be endorsed. Appears indifferent to the praise or criticism of others. Well, he was hypersensitive to criticism, so this one does not seem to be endorsed. And shows emotional coldness, detachment, or flattened affect. This one seems endorsed. So a good argument.
I feel like I might have 3 of those, maybe 2.5.
Could be made for schizoid personality disorder. So from everything I've seen here, what do I think about this controversy around the diagnosis? Well, as I mentioned, I can't diagnose him. I can only align symptoms with behavior like his. But if I were to do that, I think I would lean more on the side of schizophrenia. I think Dr. Johnson made some good points about the delusions. Particularly convincing was the idea that Kaczynski believed modern technology was controlling him. That does seem to rise to the level of a delusion. We see an alignment with avoidant personality features and also with antisocial. I think she made good points there as well. As far as the premorbid paranoid personality disorder, I think this makes sense based on how we understand cluster A personality pathology. We understand it to be on a continuum with schizophrenia. So it wouldn't be unusual for somebody who was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia to have had paranoid personality disorder before that. So the idea is that that personality disorder could be an indication that somebody would develop schizophrenia later on. So what about the schizoid personality disorder argument? Well, we see alignment with some of the schizoid symptom criteria, like I talked about. So perhaps really here we see both schizoid personality disorder and paranoid personality disorder were premorbid. So certainly a complex set of symptoms, but there's a lot there around cluster A personality pathology and around schizophrenia. The Ted Kaczynski case has been an area of interest for many professionals in the world of mental health and for those in the criminal justice system. Kaczynski was an extremely dangerous criminal. If not for his brother recognizing that writing style, it's likely he could have evaded capture indefinitely. He really had a dangerous combination of extreme intelligence, delusional thinking, paranoia, and a lack of empathy. I know whenever I talk about famous cases like the Ted Kaczynski case, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts.
All right. So that is Dr. Todd Grande. You guys should subscribe. Yes, Dr. Todd Grande. You guys should subscribe to his YouTube channel. Man, he's doing well. 1.3 million. Nice. So, yes, he is an excellent source for anything psychiatry related. Another good source is Sam Backman, but he's more like specifically about cluster B personality disorders. Yeah, so that's all interesting stuff. Speaking to the psychology of Ted Kaczynski, and you notice we had two different events that sort of two different things that you could say potentially led to making Ted Kaczynski who he was. The first event when he was 9 months old, probably doesn't even remember being separated from his mother for a long extended period of time. And then afterwards he has, probably major separation issues. And he apparently had bonding issues as well. And then his parents were apparently verbally abusive to him. So that probably didn't help either. But then he went to Harvard. And there something happened to him. And we'll get into that. But let's get into what he actually did first. Pete Grabber, how you doing? Nice to see you. Good evening. All right. So let's just start off with the beginning of his crimes. We'll do a quick overview. So the first thing happened on May 25th, 1978. There's a package. Jesus, my dogs are jerks. Stand by. Go lay down. Go lay down right now. Damn it, Scarlett. Go in the room. God, you're killing me. Usually I only have to get up like once or twice a show to deal with my dogs, but go away. Go. I don't know what's with them tonight. They're psychotic. I can't leave them outside. I can't bring them inside. Yeah, they're losing their minds. Even the old ones. I got a 15 and a 16-year-old, and they're being psycho. Jeez. Freaking 15-year-old German Shepherd could barely walk, and she's going nuts. Nope, there goes the lab. All right. I'm gonna try and get back into this. So we'll start from the beginning again. We'll start with the beginning of his crimes. On May 25th, 1978, a package wrapped in brown paper was sent to the University of Chicago. The package said return to sender on it. And that was his thing. He just sent packages places and it said return to sender, and except the return to sender address was the intended target, apparently. So the professor who was the intended target, he sent it back to security. He's like, yeah, I didn't send this package. I don't know what this is. And it explodes and a security guard got injured. So That wasn't good. Injured one guard. So that was the beginning of it. So May 25th, 1978. And then May of 79, a grad student at Northwestern University was injured by a bomb. And November of 1979, this was a big one. So November of 1979, 12 passengers on American Airlines Flight 444 from Chicago to DC were injured when luckily the bomb didn't go off. It had a faulty detonator and it just smoked like crazy. What up, Terry Wallace? They're not sweet doggies, Terry Wallace. They're awful. They're being awful. Do you want one? You can take your pick. Just take your pick. Let me know in the chat which one you want. So yeah, luckily the bomb didn't go off. It had a faulty detonator and it created a bunch of smoke. 12 passengers were injured from smoke inhalation. They had to do an emergency landing, obviously. But the bomb was big enough to blow up the whole freaking plane. So it could have been really bad. So imagine that, because I mean, that was 79. They didn't catch him until the 90s. So, I mean, if he would have been successful blowing up that plane, that would have been mad. So good thing. So it's like another thing. It's like he wasn't that good at being a terrorist, thankfully. So it's strange because he was such a smart person. I don't know. So anyway, after that, June of 1980, the president of American Airlines was injured by a bomb. So he had some personal beef with American Airlines, apparently. And then at that point, that's when the FBI formed, in June of 1980, they formed the Unabomb Task Force, they called it. And that was named after the earliest targets, which were the universities and the airlines. His bombs, they couldn't figure out who was making these bombs because it was, commonly available materials, no prints, no DNA ever. From October 1981 to June 5th, 1985, there were 6 more bombs sent to universities. 2 were defused, and 4 of the bombs caused 5 injuries. So, this is over a long period of time. So, and then December of 1985, a computer store owner was killed, and that was his first murder. So, in 1985, he killed his first person, and it was probably, according to his manifesto. I mean, I don't know. Was the computer store owner his target? He did have that was part of his manifesto. Was he blamed technology? He blamed the Industrial Revolution. And he wanted to basically return to nature. He wanted to destroy technology, essentially. I encourage everybody to read the manifesto as well. It's quite interesting. So his first murder is a computer store owner. In February of 1987, in Salt Lake City, a bomb injured another computer store owner, and a woman saw a man outside the store in a parking lot. And that led to the infamous Unabomber photo, which I should have pulled up. I didn't. I don't have it pulled up right now, but you guys all know the infamous Unabomber photo. It's the guy in the hood with the sunglasses that everybody knows. And I always confused the Unabomber with the Oklahoma City bomber, Timothy McVeigh. I always confused them because the Unabomber was caught, I believe, the same year that the Oklahoma City bombing happened, or it was right around that time in my childhood anyway. February of 87, Salt Lake City, another bomb injures another computer store guy. So he's apparently targeting computer store owners. And a woman sees him outside. Don't even know if it was him, though, because the pencil sketch doesn't look like him. But that's what created the infamous Unabomber photo that everybody knows. And then in June of 1993, 2 bombs injured 2 more people days apart. December of 1994, a bomb kills an advertising agent in New Jersey. So, second murder. In April of 1995, a bomb kills a California logging lobbyist. So, third murder. All right. So, from 1978 to 1995, so it's that 18-year period. Yeah. Ted Kaczynski murdered 3, injured 23, and in June of 95, that's when he sent his manifesto, his 35,000-word manifesto, sent it to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and some other outlets, I think. And it was titled Industrial Society and Its Future. I was going to pull up some stuff from it, but it's so long, and there's so many different things that I would want to read from it, and I'm just not going to. So you guys read the manifesto. It's quite interesting. His brother, David. So he ended up being his own worst enemy because his manifesto is what done him in. He probably, if he wouldn't have sent that manifesto, he probably could have went along a very long time doing what he was doing, because his brother David, who helped build the cabin with him, and probably thinking, my brother's been living alone out in this cabin. He gave up everything he had. Like, really think about it. He's a Harvard, or he was a professor at Berkeley. He gives up everything he has. Like, he's 25 years old. I think maybe 26 at that point. Got a great career ahead of him. In theory, he's a genius. Gives up everything to go live in a cabin in the woods. I mean, his brother Daniel had to be thinking, like, I don't know. Meanwhile, I'm a person that left the city to go live in a tiny house out in the redwoods. That's funny. I have running water, okay? I have electricity. I have interwebs. So whatever. Do not compare me to Ted Kaczynski, folks. He definitely went off the deep end there. Yeah, so his brother recognizes like the writing style of the manifesto, and probably, just the ramblings and some of the same exact things that Ted had said to him before. And he narked him out to the feds. And well, anyway, Ted Kaczynski demanded that the New York Times publish the manifesto, and they did. And that's when David recognized the writing style. He told the feds, and the feds took 2 months to get a warrant, and they did. And his cabin was outside of Lincoln, Montana, and Ted wasn't even on the radar. Like, that's the thing. They were looking for somebody that was 10 years older. I don't understand why they weren't. I don't know. I'm not a hindsight's 2020, and everybody's a armchair quarterback. But like, if you're creating a psychological profile from him, I mean, you got. I don't know. I guess the manifesto is sent late. So when would you determine that he's in academia? But you'd think you'd be looking for somebody that left academia for no reason. You'd be looking for somebody that's within academia and then like suddenly left for no reason. Like, that's, I don't know. I'm surprised they weren't looking for that. And somebody younger. But anyway, they weren't even on the Fed's radar. And they got tipped off by his brother, and they went and raided his place in the woods. And when they were there, they found, they found another active bomb. They found 400,000 journal entries. Yeah, that's about it. There was actually people that were, they were disappointed. Like, wait a minute, they found an active bomb. Like, what? He said he would stop if they published his manifesto. Like, they were disappointed that, the guy that had been murdering people and sending bombs didn't stand up to his word. So that's kind of funny, I think. But yeah, those are his crimes, and it's pretty gnarly. So people shouldn't be holding this guy up on a pedestal. Definitely not like freaking what's his name that built the killdozer that didn't actually kill anybody. They just leveled the town. That dude is my hero. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but you guys know killdozer. This guy should not be held on the same esteem. This guy murdered innocent people, guys. I mean, yes, his manifesto is very interesting. I agree with a ton of stuff that he says in his manifesto, but anybody that holds this dude up on a pedestal or praises him or whatever, I don't know. I can't. I must disavow. On that one. Doesn't necessarily mean I won't be your friend, though. So, yeah, there's that. Let's talk about his time at Harvard a little bit. This very well could have been like a major psychological event. Oh, sorry, I'm scared my board's going to fall. This very well could have been a major psychological event that contributed to his downfall. But at Harvard, he decided to participate in this study. I believe there's 22 other people that participated in the study, where I don't know how they got them to participate in it or what they told them that it was going to be, but part of the project was like they had to write down their life philosophy. You know, like what's their life philosophy? What's their approach towards life? And, you know, there's that and then additional questioning just to really probe everything about the person. Like, what are your fears? What are your deepest, darkest secrets? What are your sexual fantasies? What are some of like what's the most embarrassing thing that's happened to you? What are you scared? Like the most vulnerable things you could ask a human. They extracted all this information from these people, and then they put them up in front of everyone and like read their life philosophy and just ripped them to shreds in front of everybody, like ripped apart every aspect of them, just completely destroyed them psychologically in front of everybody. And they recorded it. And Ted Kaczynski described this as the worst experience of his life. And so they do that to everybody. They record it. And then afterwards, they made them sit down and watch the recording and ask them questions like, well, how did this make you feel? And how did this make you feel when we said this to you? And just like completely making them relive it over again. So that was a horrible thing to do to people. And yeah, that was the study that he went through. And that's all that's really reported about it. That's you know, there's you can watch the actual footage. The footage is online. You can find it. The actual recordings, the students at Harvard getting, I don't think you could see, I don't know if you could find Ted Kaczynski's actual one. You might be able to, but yeah, like this rabbit hole goes so far. There's so much more that I wanted to take in before this episode, but I just didn't have time. And frankly, I don't know if I'd want to continue, but yeah, that's the extent of what they did, essentially, from what we know. However, there could have been another aspect of these Harvard trials that the students weren't ever told of, was never put on the record, and may have happened. I'm completely speculating. May have happened only based on other things that have happened, based on the same type of research conducted by sometimes the same exact people and the same types of people. So who was the person that like signed off on this stuff? Like how was that even legal to do to students, first of all? So who was the psychiatrist that signed off on it? Well, that was this gentleman, what's his name? Something Murray. Henry Murray. And I got a little video pulled up. I'll let somebody talk about who exactly Henry Murray was. Because he was an interesting character, that is for sure. Sorry, my dogs are just distracting the hell out of me right now. I might have to go wrangle them after I play this video. All right, so the professor that was in charge of this Harvard program, this Harvard psychological study that they put Ted Kaczynski through, let's listen to a little bit about him. Mr. Henry Murray.
So what the hell was the point of all of this? And who gave the okay on psychologically traumatizing the school's own students for 3 years? The Harvard experiments were led by Henry Murray, a respected psychology professor whose contributions to the field can still be found in modern-day psychological assessments. Like many of the greats, though, Murray's career wasn't squeaky clean, ethically speaking. By his own words, Murray called the interrogative attacks on the Harvard experiment vehement, sweeping, and personally abusive. So it certainly wasn't a case of good intentions gone wrong. The goals of these experiments weren't and aren't entirely known, and it seemed Murray often deviated from an exact scientific method. One of his graduate students' assistants described him as not the most systemic scientist, and the professor himself often gave varying answers, at times suggesting his data had no value at all. Cool. Well, that's a good reason to emotionally scar a bunch of developing minds. There's other experience from Murray's background, however, that suggests he wasn't conducting these experiments just for kicks. In World War II, he was part of an Office of Strategic Services, later known as the CIA, where he helped assess agents and collaborated on a psychological profile of Hitler. The profile report specifically mentioned that Hitler would commit suicide if defeat was near. How about them?
That report's really hard to find as well. I think you could buy it on Amazon, but I was looking for it. So, yeah, the guy conducting these experiments on these students was a former member of the OG CIA, the Office of Strategic, whatever you just said, the OSS. And, well, we'll go into later what MK Ultra was about, but that was a lot of what the CIA and that whole Office of Strategic whatever, the OSS, was about, was mind control and psychological manipulation.
Them apples. He also monitored military experiments on brainwashing. Get your tinfoil hats ready. A popular theory is that Murray's ties with the CIA continued post-World War II and into the Cold War. During this time, the CIA was focused on interrogation training and techniques, how to ensure their own men would stand up to interrogation, and how to effectively break enemy prisoners. This involved tests and experiments designed to psychologically break down the subject. Sound familiar? Much of this testing was encompassed under the notorious Project MK Ultra, which would use many unknowing participants to test the use of drugs and procedures in interrogations for potential mind control.
So that's the thing there. Was LSD used on these students in those psychological experiments unknowingly? That's the question, because it was on a lot of people. That was a huge part of like Operation Midnight Climax, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They gave a lot of people acid that didn't know that they took it. And I want to know if they did that during these experiments with Ted Kaczynski. I don't have any connection saying they did, but it begs the question.
Some allege that the Harvard experiments were actually part of MK Ultra, which did utilize a variety of other institutions to secretly conduct its operations. Also adding fuel to the fire, MK Ultra drugged many of its subjects with LSD without their consent, for your information, thinking that bad acid trips were the key to controlling someone's mind. Henry Murray, funnily enough, also had an interest in psychedelics. Right around the same time period, he supervised and supported a young Harvard researcher by the name of Timothy Leary in a study of hallucinogens. According to our data, that's one coincidence too many. By an esteemed professor.
So, Harvard researcher Timothy Leary. These experiments conducted by a former CIA guy that is rumored to have still been involved with MK Ultra is conducting psychological experiments at Harvard, where Timothy Leary is also doing LSD experiments. So the psilocybin experiments and LSD being derived from psilocybin mushrooms. So that this is why I'm saying once you start going down the MK Ultra rabbit hole, it just goes off into so many different directions, because it's like, holy crap. Once you see that like one thing is actually true, you're like, wait a minute. If that was true and they're doing that, then, and it just leads you in so many different directions. And it's awful. It's how you end up becoming the red string guy in the tacks on your wall, drawing lines, connecting things together. That's what happens. It's bad. So I don't know if you guys even want to go down the MK Ultra rabbit hole, but yeah, I was trying to find his. So he did like a psychological workup on Hitler when he was at the Office of Strategic, whatever it was called, the OSS. I can't remember. He did like a psychological workup on Hitler, and I was trying to find it earlier, but I couldn't. And I remember they were trying to. Yeah, there's something where they were trying to like trans Hitler. They wanted to like put estrogen in his food and his water. It was like a whole plan to like trans Hitler. And I was trying to find it. I thought I found it through Cornell University here, through Cornell Law, but this link is dead. It brings you to nothing. So yeah, Henry Murray was a pre-World War II director of the Harvard Psychological Clinic. Before that, let's see. Henry Murray was a pre-World War II director at Harvard Psychological Clinic, and during World War II served in the Office of Strategic Services. That's what it is. The forerunner to the Central Intelligence Agency, the psychological profile of Hitler was among the papers discovered in the Law Library Donovan Nuremberg Trials collection. It's almost a unique piece that Claire Germain, the Edward Cornell Law Librarian and professor of law at Cornell Law School, posting on the web in PDF form makes it available to a broader audience and shows the uniqueness of the documents located at Cornell Library. I think somebody had the rights to it though, and they had to take it down or something. So yeah, that's an interesting one to look at for sure if you can find it. I think you could buy it on Amazon, but yeah, the same dude that conducted experiments on Ted Kaczynski also did a psychological workup on Hitler for the later to be known CIA. So interesting. That is an interesting tidbit, I think. But let's go even more into the weeds, shall we? What do we have next here? Let's listen to Timothy Leary talk a little bit, because it sort of gives you an idea into, well, Timothy Leary isn't, as far as I know, connected to the CIA heavily, but I don't think he was like working for the government or working for the man. But I do think his psychological philosophy is interesting, and you guys might recognize something with it. So just listen to him talk and see if it sounds like anything you're already familiar with. I'll give you a hint. I don't like it. This is just some Timothy Leary audio.
Now let me talk for a minute about God. The province of God, the territory of God, the realm of God. Where is it? The realm of God is the human body. The gates of Eden are the senses. The perimeter of heaven is your skin. The temple is your body. Now, what I'm suggesting is a highly orthodox and ancient doctrine. Christ said it in all of his Gospels. The kingdom of heaven, where is it? It's within. In the Gospel of St. Thomas, Christ says, if you think heaven is up there, the birds will get there before you. Or if you think it's down there, the fish will get there before you. Seek the kingdom of heaven within. And what does he mean by within? He means within. So said Hermes, so said the Buddha.
So I don't like this line of thinking here. And I don't think that's what, well, I'm not going to get into a philosophical debate with Timothy Leary here, but this to me sounds a lot like Gnosticism. almost Satanism. It's the non-existence in God and saying that he is God and man can somehow become God. And that is a very dangerous road to go down. And if you guys haven't listened to James Lindsay before, New Discourses, listen to some James Lindsay talk about Gnosticism. And there's some interesting readings. Sometimes I'll just read just text documents, but Gnosticism is a very, well, I don't know if interesting is the right word to describe it, but it sort of lends, it gives perspective for a lot of the ideological crap that's being jammed down everybody's throat right now. And if it seems like it's all coming from somewhere, well, it might be. So look into Gnosticism, and that's what I think Timothy Leary was describing there. And it's like he was trying to find God in his own mind through LSD. Anyway, I think the CIA had some other ideas for what they wanted to do with LSD, but Timothy Leary's research was highly important to them for nefarious purposes. But all right, let's now look at just a little bit of what Timothy Leary was doing at Harvard and the psilocybin project. I mean, this is just from Wikipedia, but you know, it's not a too controversial thing, so it should be fairly accurate. Let's see. So, the Harvard psilocybin project. The experiments began sometime in 1960 and lasted until March of 1962, when other professors in the Harvard Center for Research and Personality raised concerns about the legitimacy and safety of experiments in the internal meeting. So, wait a minute, let's see. So that was from 60 to 62. Kaczynski got his math degree in 1962 at Harvard. So the psilocybin experiments were going on at Harvard when Ted Kaczynski was there. So that's interesting. When professors in the Harvard Center for Research and Personality raised concerns about the legitimacy and safety of the experiments in an internal meeting. Leary and Albert's experiments were part of their personal discovery and advocacy of psychedelics. As such, their use of psilocybin and other psychedelics ranged from academically sound and open Concord prison experiment, in which inmates were given psilocybin in an effort to reduce recidivism, to frequent personal use. So yeah, in the beginning, LSD, I think that's what they were doing during their psilocybin project. They were probably just using acid because it was the synthetic derived, you know, they're probably using that, I would imagine, but it was legal then. Like that crap was legal for, you know, research purposes or whatever to get it through the school. So they start conducting these experiments on students. Now, obviously, the students liked it, and it created this whole underground thing, and people started looking for it off campus because, well, the legitimacy of these experiments started getting questioned by colleagues around, especially because Timothy Leary and his colleagues conducting these experiments, they were high as well. And their justification for being high was, well, we have to be high to be able to understand their psychological state. We have to be in the same psychological state. That's sort of how they justified it. So they start questioning the legitimacy of this, and they wanted to put some sort of they started putting regulations on this, and they decided that only graduate students could participate in this program. Undergrad students got wind of this. This created a whole like underground movement for LSD and psilocybin, and then mescaline came about. And well, I was right around 62. So if you really think about it, it seems like the whole psychedelic movement sort of started over there at Harvard. So there you go. Timothy Leary. So there's that. And we won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but that's a whole rabbit hole in itself, just psychedelics. So that's another, there's so many rabbit holes within this rabbit hole. Psychedelics itself is a whole other rabbit hole to go down, but we shall continue. Hold on here. What the heck? Alrighty. All right, sorry about that. Okay, well, all right, I got it. Okay, I have time. I got a good amount of reading to do now. This is a long article. Yeah, this is a long article, and I want to get through it. So let's talk a bit about MK Ultra. This is a good article from The Intercept from a while ago, but actually, I don't need to share it on screen, but I will. Might as well. So, all right, we go from, Ted Kaczynski's psychological experiments. At the same time, they're doing these acid experiments. The person that's conducting these psychological experiments used to be part of basically the CIA that was conducting psychological experiments with LSD, and that dude was at Harvard as well. Well, okay, I think you guys are connecting the dots. Let's learn about what MK Ultra was. This is a pretty this gives a pretty gruesome example. MK Ultra was essentially a CIA mind control program where they wanted to create assassins that they could turn on and off. Sounds familiar? There's tons of movies made about this. The Bourne Identity. That's like a perfect example of it. The super soldier that they could turn on and off. There's a funny one, American Ultra. That's a funny one with the dude. Is it Jesse Eisenberg? Yeah, I think it's Jesse whatever. But American Ultra, that's a funny one. The movie Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson from back in the day. That's a lot about MK Ultra. There's a lot of movies made about it, and the goal was to create, super soldiers, like killers that they could trigger with whatever, a word. So let's get into the weeds. This is an article from The Intercept written by Tom O'Neill and Dan Piepenbring. It's unfortunate. And it's inside the archive of an LSD researcher with the ties to the CIA's MK Ultra mind control project. Louis Jolyon West seems to have used chemicals and hypnosis liberally in his medicine practice, possibly leading to the death of a child and the execution of an innocent man. So this is a very interesting case. On the night of July 4th, 1954, in San Antonio, Texas, was shaken by the rape and the murder of a 3-year-old girl. Rape and murder of a 3-year-old girl. The man accused of the crimes was Jimmy Shaver, an airman at the nearby Lackland Air Force Base with no criminal record. Shaver claimed to have lost his memory of the incident. The victim, a 3-year-old Sherry Jo Horton, had disappeared around midnight outside the Air Force Base, where her parents had left her in the parking lot outside a bar. She played with her brother while they had a drink inside. When they noticed her missing, they formed a search party. Within an hour, the group came upon a car parked next to a gravel pit. Sherry's underwear was hanging from one of the car's doors. Shaver wandered out of the darkness. He was shirtless, covered in blood and scratches, making no attempt to escape. He let the search party walk him to the edge of the highway. Bystanders described him as dazed and in a trance-like state. Jesus. What's going on here, he asked. He didn't seem drunk, but he couldn't say where he was, how he'd gotten there, or whose blood was all over him. Meanwhile, the search party had found Horton's body in the gravel pit. Her neck was broken, her legs had been torn open, and she'd been raped. Deputies arrested Shaver. At 29, he was recently remarried with 2 children and had no history of violence. He'd been in the same same bar Horton had been abducted from, but he'd left with a friend. Who told police that neither of them was drunk, though Shaver had seemed high on something. Before deputies could take Shaver to the county jail, a constable from another precinct arrived with orders from the military police to assume custody of him. So that's interesting. Military police arrived. Around 4 that morning, the Air Force Marshal questioned Shaver, and 2 doctors examined him, agreeing he wasn't drunk. One later testified that he probably was not normal. He was very composed outside, which I did not expect him to be under these circumstances. He was released to the custody of the county jail before booked for rape and murder. Investigators interrogated Shaver in the morning. When his wife came to visit, he didn't recognize her. He gave his first statement at 10:30 a.m., adamant that another man was responsible. He could summon an image of a stranger with blonde hair and tattoos. After the Air Force Marshal returned to the jailhouse, however, Shaver signed a statement taking full responsibility, though he didn't remember anything. He reasoned he must have done it. Okay. 2 months later, in September, Shaver's memory still hadn't returned. The commander of the base hospital, Colonel Robert S. Bray, ordered a psychiatric evaluation to be performed by Dr. Louis Julian West. Okay, that name will come up again. The head of psychiatric services at the Air Force Base. It fell to West to decide if Shaver had been legally sane at the time of the murder. Shaver spent the next 2 weeks under West's supervision. They returned to the scene of the crime, trying to jog his memory later. West hypnotized Shaver and gave him an injection of sodium pentothal or truth serum to see if he could clear his amnesia. While Shaver was under, according to his testimony, he recalled the events of that night. He confessed to killing Horton. She'd brought out repressed memories of her cousin, Beth Rainabout, who sexually abused him as a child. Shaver had started drinking at home that night when he had visions of God, who whispered into his ear to seek out and kill the evil girl Beth. At the trial, West made only a minimal effort to exonerate Shaver. The airman was found guilty. Through an appeals court later ruled, the airman was found guilty, though an appeals court later ruled that he had an unfair trial. He was convicted again in the retrial. In 1958, on his 33rd birthday, he was executed by the electric chair. He maintained his innocence the whole time. The trial, which hinged on Shaver's testimony, might have ended differently had the jury known about West's past. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. According to the newly surfaced papers from West archives, the psychiatrist had some of the clearest, most nefarious ties to the scientists to the CIA's Project MK Ultra. West Files especially has correspondence with CIA's longtime poisons expert Sidney Gottlieb, shed new light on one of the most infamous projects in his agency's history, likely compromising more than 145 sub-projects and at least 185 researchers working at the institutions across America and Canada. MK Ultra was, at the New York Times put it, a secret 25-year, $25 million effort by the CIA to learn how to control the human mind. Its experiments violated international laws, not to mention the agency's charter, which forbids domestic activity. That's the other huge thing here. Many people aren't aware of this. The CIA isn't allowed to operate in America. They're not allowed to do stuff on American soil. So that's why a lot of the times you see all this crazy, dirty stuff happening that seems like CIA stuff, but somehow the FBI is involved. It's because the CIA has to get the FBI involved to operate domestically. It has to be like technically an FBI operation with like CIA backing or whatever. So that's like another little sidebar to that whole thing. So if MK Ultra was being conducted on those students at Harvard, then that can't be done. All these projects, all this MK Ultra stuff wasn't allowed to be done by the rules, but they're doing it anyway. At the trial, West maintained that Shaver had suffered a bout of temporary insanity on the night of the Cherry Joe Horton killing, but he argued that Shaver was quite sane now. In the courtroom, Shaver didn't look that way. One newspaper recounted that he sat through the strenuous sessions like a man in a trance, saying nothing, never raising to stretch or smoke, although he was known as a chain smoker. Large portions of West's truth serum interview with Shaver were read into the court record. The doctor had used... Okay, so there's no actual audio of the truth serum interview. The doctor had used leading questions to walk the entranced Shaver through the crime. Tell me about when you took your clothes off, Jimmy, he'd said. The transcript interview, which survived among West papers, also showed West trying to prove that Shaver had repressed memories. Jimmy, do you remember when something like this happened before or after you took her clothes off? What did you do? I never did take her clothes off, Shaver said. The interview was divided into thirds, and the middle third hadn't been recorded. When the transcript picked up, it said, Shaver is crying. He has been confronted with all the facts repeatedly. West asked, now do you remember it all? Don't you, Jimmy? Yes, sir, Shaver replied. Okay, so sounds to me like they turned the thing off and either beat the crap out of him or did some sort of psychological tactics, told him they were going to do stuff to him until he confessed. That's what it sounds like to me. Though lawyers scrutinized Shaver's medical history, little mention was made of the base hospital where West's archived letters indicate that he had conducted his MK Ultra experiments. Shaver had suffered from migraines so debilitating that he dunked his head in a bucket of ice water when he felt one coming on. His condition was severe enough that the Air Force had recommended him for a 2-year experimental program. The doctor who attempted to recruit him was not named in the records or the transcripts. On the stand, West said that he'd never gotten around to seeing whether Shaver had been treated in the experimental program. Lackland officials told me there was no record of him or their master index of patients. But curiously, according to the base's archivist, all the records for patients in 1954 had been maintained, with one exception. The file for the last names beginning with S.A. through S.T. had vanished. And that's from the author of a book that found that out. West's professional fascination with LSD was practically as old as the drug itself. For several decades, he was one of the elite cadre of scientists using it in a top secret research. Lysergic acid diethylamide was synthesized in 1938 by chemists in Switzerland's Sandoz Industries, but it was not introduced as a pharmaceutical until 1947 in the 50s, when the CIA began to experiment on humans with it. It was a new substance. Albert Hofmann, the Swiss scientist who discovered the hallucinogenic qualities in 1943, described it as a sacred drug that gestured towards the mystical experience of deeper, comprehensive reality. Yeah. I won't talk about it. In the 50s, even before hippies embraced the drug, very few people took LSD without having somebody being a trip leader. Charles Fisher, a drug researcher, told me the suggestibility from LSD was akin to that associated with hypnosis. Wes had studied the two in tandem. You can tell somebody to hurt somebody, but you can call it something else, Fisher explained. Hammer the nail in the wood, and the wood perhaps is a human being. Oh, that's screwed up. When West seems to have used chemicals liberally in his medical practice, and his tactics left an indelible mark on the psychiatrists who worked with him. One of them, Gilbert Rose, was so baffled by the Shaver case, he went on to write a play about it. In my 50 years in the profession, that was the most dramatic moment ever. When he clapped his hands to his face and remembered killing the girl. Rose said in 2002 of Shaver and the Truth Serum interview, but Rose was shocked when I told him that West had hypnotized Shaver in addition to giving him sodium pentothal. Hypnotism, he said, was not part of the protocol for the interview. Did he trick him into confessing? He'd also never know West had found out about the case right away. We were involved from the first day, Rose recalled. Jolly phoned me the morning of the murder. He initiated it. West claimed he was in the courtroom the day Shaver was sentenced to death. Around this time, he became vehemently opposed to the capital punishment. Did he know his experiments might have led to the execution of an innocent man and the death of a child? If his correspondence with CIA head of MK Ultra Gottlieb predicted the crime by just a year, predating the crime by just a year, had been presented in trial, would the outcome have been the same? Almost as soon as they had access to it, government scientists saw LSD as a potential Cold War miracle drug. Full-fledged U.S. research into LSD began soon after the end of the World War II. When American intelligence learned that the USSR was developing a program to influence human behavior through drugs and hypnosis, the United States believed that Soviets could extract information from people without their knowledge, programmed to make false confessions, and perhaps persuade them to kill on command. In 1949, the CIA, then in its infancy, launched Project Bluebird, a mind control program that tested drugs on American citizens, most in federal penitentiaries or on military bases, who didn't even know about, let alone consent to, the battery of procedures they underwent. So that's why I ask, did they do this to Ted Kaczynski as well? Did they give him drugs before they did all that psychological abuse to them? Because part of it was they wanted to stress them to the max. That's part of the thing they wanted to see with the MK Ultra stuff too, is they wanted to stress somebody to the max, psychologically break them down. Well, with the line of questioning they were using, that's clearly what they were trying to do. They're trying to completely psychologically break someone down. They're question everything about their own reality. Well, if you were to give them acid before you ask them all those questions, that would certainly help that process. So I don't know. I would imagine that Ted Kaczynski was slipped some acid before he was given all this stuff. I'm just speculating. Their abuse found further justification in 1952 when in Korea, captured American pilots admitted on national radio that they'd sprayed the Korean countryside with illegal biological weapons. It was a confession so beyond the pale that the CIA blamed communists. The POWs must have been brainwashed. The word, a literal translation of Chinese Xiao Niao, didn't appear in English before 1950. It articulated a set of fears that coalesced in post-war America that a new class of chemicals could rewire and automate the human mind. When the American POWs returned, the Army brought in a team of scientists to deprogram them. Jeez. Among the scientists was West. Born in Brooklyn in 1924, he had enlisted in the Air Force during World War II, eventually rising to the ranks of colonel. His friends called him Jolly for his middle name, impressive girth, and oversized personality. When he got out, he researched methods of controlling human behavior at Cornell University. Okay, so that's why that was at Cornell. Okay, that makes sense now. He would later have studied 83 prisoners of war, 56 of them who had been forced to make false confessions. He and his colleagues were credited with reintegrating the POWs into Western society, and maybe more important, getting them to renounce their claims about having used biological weapons. West's success with the POWs gained him entrance into the upper echelons of the intelligence community. Gottlieb, the poisons expert who headed the chemical division at the CIA's technical service staff, along with Richard Helms, the CIA's chief operations for the Directorate of Plans, had convinced the agency's then director, Alan Dulles, that mind control ops were the future. Initially, the agency wants only to prevent further potential brainwashing by Soviets, but the defensive program became an offensive one. Operation Bluebird morphed into Operation Artichoke and Search for All-Purpose Truth Serum. Jeez. In a speech at Princeton University, Dulles warned that communist spies could turn the American mind into a phonograph playing a disc put on its spindle by an outside genius. Just days after those remarks, on April 13, 1953, he officially set Project MK Ultra in motion. It sounds like these assholes started creating their own conspiracies. They justified all of this because they didn't understand the own crap that they were dealing with, and they seriously thought that, like, Russia could like put a bunch of acid in our water supply and then like, I don't know, play some frequencies over speakers and just make everybody in America start killing each other. It sounds like they really thought that was possible. So they had to figure out how to do it first. And that was their justification for doing it, doing all the crazy shit they did to people. That's what it sounds like. Okay. Well, just days after those remarks on April 13th, 1953, he officially set MK Ultra in motion. Little is known about the program. After Watergate, Helms, who by that time was a CIA director, ordered Gottlieb to destroy all MK Ultra papers. In January of 1973, the technical services staff shredded countless documents describing the use of hallucinogens. Perfect. In the mid-1970s, the Times revealed the existence of MK Ultra on its front page. The government launched 3 separate investigations, all of which were hobbled by the CIA's destruction of its files. Vice President Nelson Rockefeller's commission on the CIA activities within the United States in 1975, Senator Frank Church's Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities, 1975 through 76. The Senators Edward Kennedy and Daniel Inouye's joint Senate Select Committee hearings on Project MK Ultra, the CIA's program of research in behavioral modification, 1977. When records were available, they were redacted. When witnesses were summoned to testify before Congress, they were forgetful. How convenient. We do know the project's broadest goals was to influence human behavior. Under its umbrella were at least 149 sub-projects. Many involved research on unwitting participants. Gottlieb, whose aptitude and amorality earned him the nickname Black Sorcerer, developed gadgetry straight out of schlocky sci-fi, high-potency stink bombs, swizzle sticks laced with drugs, exploding seashells, poisoned toothpaste. Having persuaded an Indianapolis pharmaceutical company to replicate the Swiss formula for LSD, the CIA had a limitless domestic supply of its favorite new drug. Oh, man. So if you were taking acid back in the 60s in America, in the Bay Area particularly, you were probably taking acid that was developed by the CIA. Like, no joke. Like, that's probably where it came from, was the CIA. The Summer of Love may not have happened if it wasn't for the CIA. Like, how much acid was the CIA flooding America with? Like, think about it. It sounds like LSD was only made at the Swiss lab, and then once the CIA got the recipe for it, they started making it. But somehow CIA was, or the acid was everywhere in the 60s. Was the CIA supplying America with acid? Like they supplied, what was it? The streets of Chicago and New York and like inner city black neighborhoods with crack? Isn't that what the CIA did? They decided to get black neighborhoods addicted to crack. I think that's what they did. Anyway. Yeah, okay, sorry. Lost my place there. The CIA had limitless domestic supply of its favorite new drug. The agency hoped to produce couriers who could embed hidden messages in their brains to implant false memories and improve true ones in people without their awareness, to convert groups to opposing ideologies, and more. The loftiest objectives was the creation of hypno-programmed assassins. The most sensitive work was conducted far from Langley, farmed out to scientists, psychologists, hospitals, prisons, and military bases all over the United States and Canada. The CIA gave these scientists aliases, funneled money to them, and instructed them on how to conceal their research from prying eyes, including those of their unknowing subjects. Man. Their work encompassed everything from electronic brain stimulation to sensory deprivation to induce pain and psychosis. They sought ways to cause heart attacks, severe twitching, and intense cluster headaches. If drugs didn't do the trick, they'd try to master ESP, ultrasonic vibrations, and radiation poisoning. One project tried to harness the power of magnetic fields. Jesus. MK Ultra was so highly classified that when John McCone succeeded Dulles as CIA director in 1961, he was not informed of its existence until 1963. Fewer than half a dozen agency brass were aware of it at all, any period during its 20-year history. So I'd like to remind you guys that the CIA, the oversight over the CIA is Congress. And the CIA basically works directly for the president. Like Congress isn't their oversight. Their direct oversight is from the president, right? So the CIA, people work for the CIA for, decades and decades and decades. Well, they get a new president, he replaces the CIA director. I don't see how the CIA has become this big giant monster that nobody can control. Just wanted to sort of set that reminder. All right, we're almost through here. West head of the psychiatry department at UCLA and the school's renowned neuroscience center until his retirement in 1988. One day, among a batch of research papers on hypnosis in West's archives there, I found the letters between West and his CIA handler, Sherman Grifford. The cover name, according to John Marks, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, for Sidney Gottlieb, West, who had once written West, who had once written to a magazine editor that he had never worked for the CIA, had in fact worked closely with the agency's black sorcerer himself. The letters picked up midstream with no prologue or preliminaries. The first was dated June 11, 1953, a mere 2 months after MK Ultra started, when West was chief of the psychiatric service at the Air Force Base at Lackland. So this dude was clearly part of some sort of experiment that West was conducting, and that's why they took him back to that Lackland. We're never going to know. I want to read this little quote off to the side here. Who would the guinea pigs be? West listed 4 groups: basic airmen, volunteers, patients, and others, possibly including prisoners and the local stockade. Okay. Addressing Gottlieb, S.G. West outlined the experiments he proposed to perform using a combination of psychotropic drugs and hypnosis. He began with a plan to discover the degree to which information can be extracted from presumably unwilling subjects through hypnosis alone or in combination with certain drugs, possibly with subsequent amnesia for the interrogation and or alteration of the subject's recollection of the information he formerly knew. Another item proposed honing techniques for implanting false information into particular subjects or for inducing in them specific mental disorders. He hoped to create couriers who would carry a long and complex message embedded secretly in their minds, and to study the induction of the trance states by drugs. His list lined up perfectly with the goals of MK Ultra. Needless to say, West added the experiments must eventually be put to test in practical trials in the field. To this end, he asked Gottlieb for some sort of carte blanche. Oh boy. Who would the guinea pigs be? He listed 4 groups: basic airmen, volunteers, patients, and other, possibly including prisoners in the local stockade. Only the volunteers would be paid. The others would be unwilling, and though it wasn't spelled out, unwitting. It would be easier to preserve his secrecy if he were inducing specific mental disorders in people who already exhibited them. Certain patients requiring hypnosis and therapy or suffering from dissociative disorders, trances, fusions, amnesias, etc., might lend themselves to our experiments. Official investigators into MK Ultra yielded little information about his subject, but West's letter suggested that he programmed his program cast a wide net. So he was experimenting on a bunch of people that were in psychiatric wards, and he was experimenting on these people because it's like, well, if they say anything, people are just going to think they're crazy anyway. It's just so freaking sick. It's like a Clockwork Orange, or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Yeah, there's movies made about that too. actually freaking conspiracy theory. He's kind of about that. Gottlieb's reply came on letterhead from Kermofil Associates. Yeah, Gottlieb's reply came on letterhead from Kermofil Associates, a front company he used to correspond with MK Ultra subcontractors. My good friend, he wrote, I had been wondering whether your apparent rapid and comprehensive grasp of our problems could possibly be real. You have indeed developed the admirably accurate picture of exactly what we are after. For this, I am deeply grateful. Gottlieb saluted the new recruit. We have gained quite an asset in the relationship we are developing with you. West returned the commodary. What? West returned the commodary. I don't like that word. It makes me very happy to realize that you consider me an asset, he replied. Surely there is no more vital understanding conceivable in these times. In 1954, around the same time as Cherry Joe Horton's murder, West began to split his time between Lackland and the University of Oklahoma School of Medicine, where he would lead the psychiatry department. West had told his prospective employer that his Lackland duties were purely clinical and that he had been doing no research, classified or otherwise. And he asked the board of directors at Oklahoma for permission to accept money from the Geschichter Fund for Medical Research, which he called a nonprofit private research foundation. In fact, as the CIA later acknowledged it, Geschichter was another of Gottlieb's fictitious shell organizations and enabling him. Jeez. In 1956, West reported back to the CIA that the experiments had begun in 1953, at last come to fruition. In 1956, a paper titled The Psychophysiological Studies of Hypnosis and Suggestibility, he claimed to have had achieved the impossible. He knew how to replace true memories with false ones, and human beings without their knowledge. Without detailing specific incidents, he put it into layman's terms. It has been found to be feasible to take the memory of a definite event in the life of an individual and, through hypnotic suggestion, bring about the subsequent conscious recall to effect that this event never actually took place, but that a different fictional event actually did occur. He'd done it. He claimed by administering new drugs effective in speeding the induction of the hypnotic state and in deepening the trance that he can produce in given subjects. Okay, so he's claiming he actually did it. He's claiming that he could take a memory from your brain, like something that actually happened, remove it, and replace it with something that didn't happen. And this is back in the 50s that he's saying that he could do that. Back in the 50s. Okay, at the National Security Archives in D.C., I found the version of the psychophysiological studies of hypnosis and suggestibility that the CIA turned over to the Senators Kennedy and Inouye in 1977. West's name and affiliation were redacted as expected, but the CIA's version was also shorter and watered down in comparison. West's document was 14 pages. This one was only 5, including a cover page. Most glaringly, there was no mention of West's triumphant accomplishment, the replacement of the memory of a definitive event in the life of an individual with the fictional event. One passage not in West's original claims, the CIA never used LSD in studies at all. The effects of LSD and other drugs upon production, maintenance, and manifestations of disassociated states has never been studied. BS. Okay. West, of course, had studied those effects for years, but when it came to elaborating on his findings about implementing memories and controlling thoughts, even in the paper found in West's own files, he offered new details. He seems to have found in a rudimentary phase of his research, acid, he wrote, made people more difficult to hypnotize. It was better to pair hypnosis with long bouts of isolation and sleep deprivation. Using hypnotic suggestion, he claimed, a person cannot be told that it is now a year later, and during the course of this year, many changes have taken place, so that it is now acceptable for him to discuss matters that he previously felt he should not discuss. An individual who insists he desires to do one thing will reveal that that secretly he wishes just the opposite. Had the CIA doctored West's original document to mislead the Senate committee? Raises a question. And if so, would the agency have gone to so much trouble to hide experimental findings that weren't ultimately all that revealing? Agency officials claimed that the program had been a colossal failure, leading to mocking headlines like "the gang that couldn't spray straight." Perhaps the agency wanted the world to assume that MK Ultra was a bust and forget the whole thing. The CIA seems to have paired MK Ultra back in the mid-60s. I'm sorry. Yeah, the CIA seems to have paired MK Ultra back in the 60s, according to congressional testimony and surviving financial records, but Jolly West's governmental-funded research continued apace. Late in the fall of 1966, West arrived in San Francisco to study hippies, LSD, tall abroad, and crew cut with an all-American look in keeping with his military past. He cobbled together a new wardrobe and started skipping haircuts. He secured a government grant and took a year-long sabbatical from the University of Oklahoma, normally to pursue a fellowship at Stanford, although that school had no record of his participation in the program. When he arrived in Haight-Ashbury, West was the only scientist in the world who predicted the emergence of a potentially violent LSD cult, such as Charles Manson family. In 1967, psychiatry textbook, West had continued a chapter called Hallucinogens, warning students of a remarkable substance percolating through college campuses into cities. LSD was known to leave users unusually susceptible and emotionally labile. It appealed to alienated kids who would crave shared forbidden activity in a group setting to provide a sense of belonging. Another one of his papers, 1965's Dangers of Hypnosis, foresaw the rise of dangerous groups led by crackpots who hypnotized their followers into violent criminality. He cited two cases, a double murder in Copenhagen committed by a hypno-programmed man, and a military offense included experimentally in an undisclosed U.S. Army's base. It's not all that clear that latter referred to Shaver's killing of Sherry Joe Horton. Oh, this guy is so evil. He'd also supervised a study in Oklahoma City in which he'd hired informants to infiltrate teenage gangs and endanger a fundamental change in basic morale, religious, or political matters. The title of the project was Mass Conversion, and it had been funded by Gottlieb. In the Haight-Ashbury, West arranged the use of crumbling Victorian house on Frederick Street, where he set up what he described as a laboratory disguised as a hippie crash pad. The pad opened in June 1967 at the dawn of the Summer of Love. He insisted 6 graduate students in the pad, telling them to dress like hippies and lure itinerant. I don't like the writing style of this person. Itinerant. I don't know what that word means. Kids into the apartment. Passerbys were welcome to do. Passerbys. Sorry. It's supposed to be passerbys. It says passerby. Passerbys were welcome to do as they pleased and stay as long as they liked, as long as they didn't mind grad students taking notes on their behavior. Oh boy. According to the records in West files, his crash pad was funded by the Foundation's Fund for Research in Psychiatry Incorporated, which had bankrolled a number of his other projects too, across decades and institutions. Dr. Gordon Deckard, West's successor at the chair of University of Oklahoma, told me that he had found papers in West's desk that revealed that the Foundation Fund was a front for the CIA. Of course. This wouldn't have been the agency's first disguised laboratory in San Francisco. A few years earlier, the equivocally titled Operation Midnight Climax had seen CIA operatives in at least 3 Bay Area safe houses disguised as upscale bordellos, kitted out with one-way mirrors and kinky photographs. A spy named George Hunter White and his colleagues hired prostitutes to entice prospective Johns to the homes, where the men were served cocktails laced with acid. The goal was to see if the LSD, paired with sex, could be used to coax sensitive information with the men. White later wrote to a CIA handler, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. Okay, these people were freaks. Geez, this article's long. At the Haight-Ashbury pad, though West's motives were vague, no one seemed to have a firm grasp of the project's purpose, not even those involved in it. The grad students hired the staff West crash pad. The grad students hired to West crash pad were assigned to keep diaries of their work in unguarded moments. Nearly all these students admitted that something didn't add up. They weren't sure what they were supposed to be doing or why West was there, and often he wasn't there. Okay, this takes us exactly to where I want to be with this. There's a quick clip from a Joe Rogan interview I want to show you guys. Well, it's not a very quick clip, actually. It's kind of long. So hopefully I can get through the whole thing. We might be able to get through the whole thing. Yeah, it's kind of a long clip, but this is the article. This is the author of the book Chaos, where all that information I was just reading to you, it probably all came from this guy, Tom O'Neill. So stand by. I'm going to play this quick clip for you guys.
So you brought up MK Ultra.
Yes.
MK Ultra was a government program run by the Central Intelligence Agency. Originally started as something called Bluebird in 1948-49, morphed into Artichoke, and then in 1952 became MK Ultra. It was a mind control program, a brainwashing program. The CIA was trying to learn how to control people's behavior without their knowledge. Now, this is all came out in Senate and congressional hearings in the 70s. It was exposed, but nobody knew about it until 1974 when Seymour Hersh, the New York Times reporter, reported it on the front page of the paper. So their main objective was to commit.
So Seymour Hersh, by the way, that's the dude that brought you. He brought you, well, most recently, the Nord Stream pipeline. He broke the story that it was most likely the CIA that bombed the Nord Stream pipeline. He broke the story of the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. A lot of big stories. And this one, MK Ultra.
Or to create what they called hypno-programmed assassins, people who would kill on command, popularly known as Manchurian Candidates, after a book that was written in 1962 and later became a movie and then a movie again. The people would be, through drugs and hypnotism, the objective was to get people to go and commit an act of murder against their moral code and have no memory of their programming and be amnesic even of the act after the fact often. That was just that was their main goal, but they were also trying to create couriers, people, military people that they could implant messages, send them, across dangerous areas where there were, at that time it was the Vietnam War, and deliver messages and then have them wiped from their memory in case they were captured. They had all kinds of objectives. So Roger Smith was supervising Manson when he became he was able to do exactly what the MK Ultra program had been trying to create and do for, at that point, about 15, 17 years. When it was all exposed in the 70s, and there were these hearings, first the Rockefeller Commission hearings and the church hearings, and then finally Senators Ted Kennedy and Daniel Inouye held hearings. The CIA admitted that they had done this, but no one would say exactly what they did. All the records had been destroyed when the two people who ran it, Richard Helms, who had become the director of the CIA in the 60s, and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was kind of the mad scientist who had supervised they had safe houses in San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, where they would experiment on people that were lured into these apartments and houses that were either look like brothels or hippie
Just keep in mind all the people that were in San Francisco during this time period. This was the summer of love, San Francisco. You had the Grateful Dead had their house in San Francisco. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, freaking San Francisco was the place. Meanwhile, the CIA is running all these crazy operations. How many of these people? Charlie Manson is there. Like, how many of these people were brushing elbows? Man, the 60s in San Francisco were wild.
communes or whatever. And the people who were working at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic that was run by another Smith, which makes it a little confusing, but Dr. David Smith, who founded it, he had given an office to a scientist named Jolly West, Louis J. West, who was, when the hearings occurred in the 70s, identified as a top MK Ultra researcher. He was an academic, come out of the military, had been at the University of Oklahoma, and then UCLA running the psychiatric divisions. He denied ever being involved in MK Ultra. And this was one of the moments, I think it was 2001, when, things really kind of shook the course of my reporting. Was I learned that West had been at the same place that Manson was in the Haight in the summer that Manson became exactly what the CIA was trying to create. And I knew, actually, I'd interviewed West about 7 years before for a story I did about celebrity stalkers, the people who were obsessed with stars and then only to kill them or try to kill them. And he was an expert in violence, hypnotism, brainwashing, and he was the chair of the psychiatry department at UCLA at that point. He was dead when his name came up in the Manson story. And there wasn't a lot of, I guess there was a lot of Google then, or a little bit, but when I did a little research, I found out that there had been these allegations that he'd been involved in MK Ultra. He always denied it. He was never prosecuted, never even investigated. He went to his grave threatening to sue anybody that said he would have anything to do with this kind of a program. Again, through another long story, but I got access to his files, which had been left at UCLA, and they had never been processed when I called. And when I made the request, it took them 2 or 3 months to process the papers. I went through them through the whole summer looking for a needle in a haystack. And it was intuition, gut. I just thought there might be something there. And sure enough, I eventually found it. It was correspondence between Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, the doctor that ran MK Ultra, beginning in 1953, about conducting experiments on people without their knowledge to get them to have amnesia of the acts after they were programmed, and everything that he had been accused of and denied, he did. Not only did he do it, he created the blueprint for the whole program with Gottlieb. The fact that all these kind of interesting research programs merged at the Haight, at the clinic, and then Manson came out of it with the power to do exactly what the MK Ultra had been trying to create for up to that point, I thought was worth investigating further. And that's why I kept going and going and going.
They did a lot of crazy shit back then. Are you aware of?
So it's really starting to look like Charlie Manson was a CIA asset as well. So there's that.
Of Operation Midnight Climax?
Those were the safe houses in San Francisco.
Well, that was the brothel version of it. Yeah, where they lured these Johns into these brothels and then dosed them up with LSD and studied them. Yeah,
George Hunter White was the head CIA guy, and he would sit behind a two-way or one-way mirror and watch the Johns would be dosed with LSD. They tried aerosols or just drinks, different things, and then they would study their behaviors.
Aerosols?
Yeah, aerosol sprays.
Really?
Yeah.
But that would get the prostitutes too then, no?
No, the prostitutes would get them in there, and then they go to the bathroom or something, or to be in the bathroom. Yeah.
Oh,
and again, the problem is the records are so scant because Helms ordered Gottlieb to destroy all the records in 1973. When
there's a movie, what is it, like Bad Times at the El Royale or something like that as well, with crap, now I can't remember his name. Dude played Thor. Yeah, that's basically what he's describing there. It's like a movie about a hotel that was essentially that, where they drugged people and had two-way mirrors. And anyway,
when the two men left the agency. And the only reason anybody ever discovered that it existed was a whistleblower, somebody who used to work for the State Department who remembered that there were records in a warehouse, and they were just financial records from the beginning of the program in 52 until the end, and the possible end in 73. And it was just financial records of where research took place, how much was spent, what kind of equipment was bought, but nothing about the content. The guy that found that ended up testifying to Congress and working with Seymour Hersh to expose it was named John Marks. He wrote the first book about MKUltra that came out in the mid to late 70s called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. And after he wrote his book, he never, he spoke, did a little bit of a tour, and then retreated into obscurity and never would do an interview again until I approached him in the early 2000s. And when I told him what I had found in West's files, these documents, he agreed to meet with me at his townhouse in Washington, D.C. And he told me, he said, the reason I stopped talking or writing about this was people were camping out on my front lawn, telling me that they'd been victims of MKUltra. He goes, I couldn't go anywhere. My whole life became crazy because.
So once he exposed that the CIA had been giving acid and God knows what else to people to observe their behavior at these safe houses, a bunch of people were like, that's what happened that night. Holy crap. Or that's what that continued relationship was, where all these weird things would happen. And they all started camping out on his lawn and trying to get a hold of him. They must have done this to so many people.
Because everybody thought that they were subject to this because nobody knew. They did these drug tests on prisoners, hospital patients, Johns, hippies, people that had no idea that this was going on for 25 years. So Marks became the authority. So he had never given an interview till he met with me. And when he looked at my documents, at that point, I think I had about 10 or 12 or 15 pages that grew eventually because I kept going back to the files and getting more. He said it was the most unredacted, uncensored account of what the real objectives were and what was really being done. He said, if I had that, my whole book would have been different. That's one of the problems about saying, well, how much did they do or how far did they go? There's barely any record. And that's another reason it took me 20 years because I was trying to find out whether or not Wes had actually interacted with Manson and or the.
So that's the thing. All this super crazy ass stuff that we're talking about, where the CIA was trying to develop super soldiers where they could turn on and off killers and also send secret messages. And they're doing this research through psychological manipulation, like brainwashing, psychotropic drugs, and hypnotism. And they're doing this to unwitting people on U.S. soil where they're not supposed to be operating at all. This is the stuff that we know. Imagine the stuff that we don't know. They destroyed all the records. This is just what we know they did.
Girls. I mean, I knew he was in the same facility. I knew that everybody that worked there, because I interviewed everybody that was alive. Most of them were still alive back in the late 90s and early 2000s when I did this. They all said, oh, yeah, Charlie was, we knew it was Charlie and the girls. They come in every day or every few days to see Roger. And West was there recruiting subjects. Now, West, while he was there that summer, had opened something called what he called the Haight-Ashbury Project. And in his correspondence and papers that I found, he called it a laboratory disguised as a hippie crash pad. And just like the Operation Midnight safe house, they call them safe houses, which were disguised as bordellos and that type of thing, or brothels. This was an apartment that was decked out, or as he called it, tricked out to look like a communal hippie place. He had 6 graduate students, and I have his letters to them before they came to work in this. He goes, grow your hair long, wear jeans, dress like hippies, and lure people in there. So they ran that for the summer of '67, and Wes was getting people from that Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic on Clayton Street and sending them around the corner to Frederick Street to participate in that.
Good Lord.
And I got the diaries of some of the graduate students who were there, and they all, in these diaries, said, we have no idea what we're really supposed to be doing here. We feel like this whole thing is a cover for something else. What does Jolly want? Why is he making us bring these people in? So
imagine doing that to graduate students, telling them to bring people in and drug them up. Imagine telling them.
Well, some of them
make an
liked
apartment. I'm sure they
because
liked
they
it.
were also.
So that's about where the article got us to, and you can see how deep this rabbit hole goes, because there's so much more after that. Because then you can go down the Charlie Manson rabbit hole and the what was her name? Amanda Tate, whatever her face was, that got murdered by go down the whole Charlie Manson rabbit hole. And then her boyfriend, that Amanda Tate, was it Amanda Tate? And her boyfriend that had the weird name, Rome, I can't remember his name, but he treated her horribly. And there's just so much stuff tied up with all of this, and I didn't really have an end point to get to with this show. I just want to talk about Ted Kaczynski and tie it all to the MK Ultra stuff, because it does seem like there's a little bit of that connection, and I don't know if we'll ever know truly what happened to Ted Kaczynski at Harvard, if he was actually given any drugs. But I'm going to dig more into it, because I didn't have enough time to find out everything that I wanted to. So I have a feeling we're going to be revisiting this subject, and it'll probably be tied in with Charlie Manson and potentially some other people as well. Roman Polanski, thank you, Terry Wallace. Susan Tate. Was it Susan Tate? That's right. Okay. All right. Yeah. That whole murder, that situation was crazy. So yeah, that's I think that's all I got for tonight. That was a lot as it is. And I'm going to be coming back to this subject, but I don't even know how did Ted Kaczynski supposedly kill himself. So that's like another thing that I need to dig into, because I haven't even looked into that. All I heard is it was ruled a suicide. I just saw that like a little bit before the show started. So, all right, I think that's all I got for tonight. I have a guest for Wednesday, and yeah, it's pretty awesome. Clint Russell from Literally Lockdown is going to be joining me for a little bit on Wednesday. So I'll be making an announcement probably on Tuesday. So that should be fun. If you guys are fans of Liberty Lockdown, Clint Russell, he's over on Timcast a lot, and he agreed to hang out for a little bit. So I'm super stoked about that. All right. If you guys like to support the show, I do have a Give, Send, Go set up in the link below in the description. It's also linked in my Twitter bio. I appreciate all you guys. Northside, what's going on? Yeah, Clint Russell. Yeah, he's coming on Wednesday. All right, let's read a little Chuck Norris. End the night. The best book ever written. The Truth About Chuck Norris. Let's see what we got. See if we got something funny tonight. Sometimes they're not funny. All right, what do we got? Chuck Norris bemoans the fact that the typical American is unaware that Walker, Texas Ranger is an unscripted reality show. I didn't know that. All right, folks. On that note, stay CaliBased.